Hey, good to have you here, brother. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, where you're from, college life, and then about the little guy.
Okay. Okay. Sa nistuni taniku tatsukikanasui, hamoksi itsitsimon puka kamotani. I said, hello, my name's Bright Shining Middle Star, and this little guy's name is Escape Danger. So my name's Emmette Dustbull, or my government name, suppose. And I'm from Browning, Montana, home of the Blackfeet Nation. I grew up here in Browning, currently working as a teacher right now. I teach language and physical education, or health, or PE. We live out here in Heart Butte. It's a little smaller res town outside the majority. I am 23 years old. I just recently graduated from the University of Montana. I ran 2 years for the Grizz, cross country and track, and then had a big mishap. So one of my best friends passed away not too long after. Clay or yourself kept me in the loop every now and then. So I reached out to Clay, went out to Bacone and ran for Clay for a year and really kicked it off. Really had a great season. Good 3 seasons of cross-country track, indoor and outdoor. I transferred from Bacone back to the University of Montana and ended up graduating with a bachelor's in sociology, emphasis in criminology, and a second degree in Native American studies.
Awesome. So I've kind of always said it, and you can kind of detail it. I always thought you kind of ticked a different beat. You're a little bit more modest than I am, but you were state champion in Montana. You're Blackfeet. Actually, when you called, I said, you must be Crow. A lot of those Crow tribal members up in Montana are great runners. And I hear this pause on the phone, and it's just like, Coach, those are fighting words, but since you're new, I'm gonna let it slide this one time.
Them are fighting words.
Yeah, no, one of my favorite stories.
So I'm up here in Browning. I have quite a bit of Crow buddies and like to tease back and forth. Running is a small world in cross country and track, and especially Montana, when they say just over the hill, they could be talking about 4, 5, 6 hours sometimes.
Yeah, you guys have some good rivalries.
So yeah, the root system here in Montana is heavily indigenized, and it's heavily influenced by a lot of Native runners. It's like an honor to run for Browning, just because we have like probably the most dominant record throughout cross country, and we have some of the best top tier runners that came out of Browning, and to be able to be amongst that high caliber just running and being a part of that indigenous culture of running, it still drives me today, and I hope that my son can follow in the footsteps. I did win cross country, I did win the 800 meter. I set the divisional record. I come in PR'd by 4 seconds in the 800 meter, and then won state, which was really awesome on the part, whereas it opened up a ton of doors for me, just getting different recruits and going on recruiting trips and kind of like doing it a lot by myself, just like trying to figuring out the ropes. And just with the background coming from Browning, I know not a whole lot of people went to college and then had a successful story, so that was one of my main objectives, was to go there, learn as much as I can, and just take that basic concept of leave the res, and kind of leave the res, get away from that like mindset of, the smart people leave and they don't come back. Whereas like I want to be one of those people that left, and just that basic concept of, going outside the res and outside the tribe and just getting resources from, tens and thousands of years. We had this concept of just leaving, getting resources and bringing it back. And that's how, that's how I saw things when I was still in high school and still like going through the motions and trying to figure things out. And I was like, the best way I could do things is getting that education, using my legs as much as I can just to get me into doors, introducing me to the outside world. And that was one of my main goals that I had, and I wasn't stopping for nothing. Like I was just, after I won state, it was just like even a bigger snowball effect where I was just constantly like, okay, let's keep going, let's keep doing this. So because like yourself being a coach, the training is ridiculous. You gotta train. There's no overnight success with this sport. It's just either you gotta do it or you just gotta stay mediocre. That was a big
it's a lifestyle. I mean, it takes years and years just to have that lifestyle of being a all-around good runner. It's a lot of things, sleep, habit, life, and you can kind of use a cheat code and get away for a little bit, but it just takes time. I think people psych themselves out looking at how long it takes, and they'll overwhelm themselves and kind of let up. But what about you? So something with you is you've always been wired to push, be outgoing. You had that mindset, which I think is hard for people to understand, because this was the year before you. I had a lot of kids. They were actually my Hopi kids were talking about who was more traditional. And I just kind of looked at them, I was like, guys, whoever brings resources back to the community is more traditional. It's not brain science. And they kind of like looked at me, and I think it was Iverson. He's like, the Cherokee white guy had something to offer that was worthwhile. And I was just like, I don't know I don't know what to say to that.
Cherokee brother.
Yeah. And I just said, guys, at the end of the day, you're using the sport and a degree as a platform to build your community. There is a notion, you're smart, leave it, not go back. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I tell, I won't say his name. I don't know if he wants me to, but he's like, I don't like home. I don't like living there. I don't want to live there after college, but I'm going to for 5 years. And I was like, why? And he goes, well, I want to be a teacher for at least 5 years. And then after that, I think he mentioned Phoenix. I want to go live in Phoenix, but I want to give back at least for 5 years to my community and be a teacher and coach. And I remember thinking, he's got to figure it out. Whether he liked it or not wasn't the point. It was how you could use the resources he was able to attain to help build this community in some way. And a lot of life go back. I mean, it's a simple way of life. And, if you go back, just make sure you have the resources. So for you.
And I've noticed that with a lot of different, kind of just like with more of an Indigenous perspective on things. Like I notice a lot of more traditional people, they're more community over capitalism mindset, where they have I have a dream job within my community. Yeah. My dream job is to help my community. I don't have a work 9 to 5, this concept of white picket fence. They're like, no, I don't want that. You keep that. I want this community. I want my community to thrive while I thrive.
Yeah. It makes you feel like you have a purpose. You're not just laying a pipeline and going through the motions. And those are good jobs too. Those are good jobs. But I don't focus on recruiting those kids. I wish them well when I cross paths with them. But I want people to build communities through, being a coach or a teacher. We've talked about Browning's legacy. It's absolutely crazy. And I don't think they get the due respect. I don't think people do their historical research to see how many great runners have came out of Browning. A lot of people talk about Hopi High, I think, because they're a little more recent, but not all long ago, Browning was a very dominant national powerhouse program with a lot of the top Native runners. Yeah. And, that was, I was asking, I was like, what is it? And you're like, they had a good coach. I don't know what to tell you. And I was like, my thought process was, this one guy changed the game. And then another, I don't know if they had the same coach the whole time, but just a good coach went a long ways to help develop, good people and good runners. So for you, being from Browning, for your life, what was the hardest thing? What was your biggest hurdles that you had to face growing up? Do you feel like anything got in your way? Obviously you persevered, but what was the things that, you felt like held you back and you had to look to overcome?
Oh, put me on the spot. No. Yeah, one of the biggest things was probably honestly the mirror. Like it was like I had to do a lot of like self digging and self realization, self actualization, just with myself as a whole. You know, I still do that today. Like question everything, but just like sometimes I just get in my own way. If it was getting in trouble with the law, getting in trouble at school, getting in all the way from just like 8th grade on up. You know, if like I always bring it back. I had the privilege of attending, you know, Cutswood, Nitsipuas, and it's one of our Indigenous, you know, revitalization schools out here on the res that we focus primarily on using our language to further our education. So like if I within there they took a whole different radical approach than the school system, and I always say that if it wasn't for Cutswood, then I wouldn't be the person I am today. You know, I wouldn't be able to kind of self-actualize and
So
self-realize.
educators in particular really helped you.
Oh yeah, not only that, well, it was more like a family, like a community-based growing up where I had to really self-realize just like all the different problems. Like even if they were passed down historically, traumically, they were just there. And so I had to like start to figure it out. If not, then I was gonna be my own downfall, honestly. But just with like the alcohol and is, you know, just with the types of different things that I was like going through, you know, maturing and friend groups, I would constantly deal with different friend groups. I mean, if I was in freshman, junior, senior, sophomore, you know, whatever, I was always constantly in and out of different friend groups. And sometimes I could say that it was them who got me in trouble, or but it really was me. And like a lot of the times that self-perseverance, that was a thing that kind of got me through. Just like I got a goal oriented. Yeah.
I think I've noticed there's a lot of things. You have good foresight, is I think what you're basically saying. You know, I think that's really hard. You know, I was getting on to someone and I go, "You're not wired to think ahead," and they kind of look at it. It's like I'm not actually insulting you. The frontal lobe of your brain is not developed, so when you start thinking about the future, your brain doesn't wrap around it. And this person in particular has said, "It's why I ask you, what would you do if you were me with you messing up with X, Y, and Z?" And you know, they'll struggle to realize that, and it's hard. So you have to take steps to, you know, kind of figure out how to start foreseeing yourself be successful. I actually tell, you know, as you know, I would tell a lot of people to you know, have a post-it inside their phone to remember themselves, or a picture on the wall, or, you know, a note to kind of remind themselves of why they're doing it. Because if you run for yourself, you got a ticking clock. It's not going to last too long. So I don't know. It's just important to kind of grasp what you want to do and have that foresight and reflection. I mean, most people, you mentioned it was mostly yourself that is the reason why you weren't successful. Most people wouldn't say that. They would say, "Oh, it's hanging around knuckleheads. Knuckleheads make me do knucklehead things." You know, it can go both ways. So, I mean, I think that goes a long way. You know, for other natives in your community, do you think they struggle with the same thing, or do you think
Absolutely.
they're a little different?
Absolutely. Especially with the you know, you got being a coach, or being able to step in the room and come home and like start picking up on the different aspects of, like, you don't really understand the culture until you're in it, until you're like living it. And so what I noticed is, well, like in most cases, the very athletic kids, they're more mature in a sense that they're off already making their own decisions, whether they're gonna drink alcohol, do drugs, or, you know, that. And then so you're trying to keep them very athletic kids just going.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was one of the biggest things that I saw was how do we reverse this culture shift? How do we make it family oriented again? How do we, you know, bring it in? And, you know, this past season, I wasn't know if I was going to be around or not. So I didn't put my name in the bucket to become head coach. And then COVID kind of like really messed things up. But just being a teacher, especially with health and really focusing on like mental health and like self-awareness, we kind of just look into things about like project based, how we can help our community, even as a class. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it didn't necessarily have to be a runner, but I tried to use that platform of running, like, and then just using our old records and everything like that. Like, what was the difference between there, you know? And the difference is you got to train. Like, there's no one way around it.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, at that young age, there's so many distractions, so it's really easy
Absolutely.
to get caught up. And I think we were talking about this. You know, what was part of the reasons why Browning has or has not had recent success, and it's just more distractions in today's time, and maybe that was part of it. So I guess the next question would be that kind of goes hand in hand with that. How have you brought, you know, your culture into the sport of running?
Oh yeah. For myself, I've kind of always, so in our culture we have like things called transfers, where we transfer into something, a society, and then we transfer out, and it's like a coming to life type of thing. And with running, I haven't not necessarily transferred at that phase of life yet, so I'm kind of up in the air. Like, am I willing to transfer out of that phase of life and then go into a completely new lifestyle where I kind of pass the torch on to somebody else, and hopefully they pick up and they revitalize that energy and pick it up and keep going even further. And so I try to base that into, like, inside the heads of seniors, where I'm like, hey, you know, you're the one that's creating the culture. It's not me. I'm just a tool. You're the one that's going to be like, hey, I need to be that active role model. That way the freshmen coming up, we can create a culture based, and we can get this thing rolling again. That way we can, you know, bring home a couple state titles, bring home a little, because when we celebrate success, it's the whole community. It's not just our team. And that's, I think, the major difference between like a westernized society and our like indigenous society, is that when we come home with these things, and we come home with these coups and these types of different indigenous victories, that we're able to celebrate it with our family and our friends, and everybody's there like encouraging you. So it's not just our success, it's like a whole lot. And I try to really instill that.
Yeah,
It's just
I mean, you're correct. I'm a psychology guy, so I like seeing different cultures and communities and what the differences are. And that's the, you know, one big reason I recruit, you know, predominantly Native athletes. And I have some pretty darn good Hispanic kids that are very similar too. But is the one thing that's different amongst the Native community, amongst any other current community that I'm familiar with in the US, and talking out of quite a few communities, but the one difference between the Native communities is the sense of community. If one person does well, others want to do well. Even tribes with rivalries, if one does well, the other wants to do well. They kind of join, you know, they join that bigger purpose in that platform. And that's, you know, that was something that I tell the runners a lot. I go, if you're successful, you're likely to change someone's life that cleans up and does something for the better too. That isn't prevalent in other cultures and communities. It's prevalent in the Native community. I think I was talking with this one time, and, you know, I always try to explain it to people, and it's always a process, but, oh yeah, he's Native, so they have this and this, and they're comparing some, you know, Montana tribe. I think they were talking about Lakotas, and they were comparing them to, I think it was the Comanches in Oklahoma. And I was like, they are completely different cultures and nationalities. They are nothing the same. They're both Native American, but they are nothing the same. And they couldn't wrap their mind around it. And I go, there's over, to my knowledge, I think there's way more, but there's over 500 Native tribes in the country. They all have their own culture. There is some similarities. They all have their big differences. They are their own. They aren't just, hey, you're Native too, we're the same. No, they're very, very different. And that's something that I always try to kind of relay to people. Some can grasp it, some it's hard. But I do say all these tribes have this one thing in common time and time again, and I'm sure I'll find some people that don't have it, but it's the sense of, if someone else does well, it makes other people want to do well. The sense of community in Native tribes is way more relevant than any other kind of culture and community. And it's the sense of, my wealth isn't this nice house, isn't my bank account. My wealth is my family, my friends.
A relationship based,
Yeah, it's everything's relationship based, as you said. And that's, I mean, as I tell the runners, I go, it gives you purpose. And I had one kid goes, well, that sounds stressful with that peer pressure. I go, would you rather be running for something or just running for no one and just going through the motions? He goes, well, I'd rather have something to run for. I go, don't see it as pressure. You know, you're going to have plenty of opportunities. If you fail, you fail, but you'll have another try. And I think that's important is, you know, knowing what you do has more purpose than any other kind of community in the country. I mean, that's the one thing natives have is they got purpose. And I think I was venting to you guys one time and I just said, you know, a lot of the top native runners in the country, you know, a lot of them are good people, but they come from the same cut and fold, I will say it, and it drives me nuts. And I, you know, as I tell people, I go, you know, natives have way more talent than them, especially as a whole. But you know, they grow up quicker, they have to work quicker, they face the realities of life quicker. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means they have this. Sometimes they get pulled in a different direction, and it's harder to have things handed to them. You know, if you see a native runner succeed, more likely than not, they really earned it. They didn't get it handed to. They didn't. You know, one of the state record holders, native runners that I crossed paths with, his first pair of new shoes was the shoes I got him. And I remember thinking, how's this guy not had any shoes in the past 5 or 6 years? Like legitimate
Shoes are huge.
yeah, not the holes in the shoes Nike Freeze, which was like a 5-year-old version he wore. And I'm just thinking, you know, I was telling that to another kid that had a state record, the kid I had. He wasn't native, and I remember him actually watching him break the state record, and he goes, where the heck did this kid come from? And his name's Ben. It's like, Ben, I told you this kid would come out of the woods and break your record. And he goes, how? Like, you know, he was genuinely impressed. He wasn't mad. And he goes, is there a lot of natives like him that can just come out of the woodwork and in 7 months you never heard of them and all of a sudden break state records? And I go, yeah, they're everywhere. They're really good runners. And I go,
Yeah.
they grew up quick. They just need a lot of encouragement. They need to stick with it. And I go, it's just a different walk of life. And I go, the talent and potential is there. They need more role models and they need more relatability. You know, you were a tool, as you mentioned. They need each other. They need someone that's also in school with them to be a role model. That relatability is a very critical factor to be successful. I mean, it is. So kind of going hand in hand with my last question or two is how important do you think it is, whether they identify as runners or not, but how important do you think it is for Native youth to run?
All around, I think, well, if you think about it, when right from the get-go, you have kids that are getting basketballs and footballs, but then you look at our history and the things we have been doing for tens and thousands of years is running. And it's like, if bad aspects can get passed down through DNA, so could good aspects.
Yeah.
And that's why if you go through Indian country, you know, you see nothing but good runners and good bullshitters, because that's all they can do is tell stories and run. No, I think running overall, I mean, even on the health aspect, all the way up into freaking 60 years old, if you get a good run in, you know, you're constantly, even in the inside of your system, you're able to, you know, rejuvenate and kind of rebuild cells that kind of been taken over by bad diets, unhealthy lifestyles. But for kids to run, you know, we never know who's going to be the next Billy Mills, because running is it's not an overnight success. You have to run. Like, you got to run. That's it. How are you going to get better at running is you run. And so for Native kids to run, you know, some of the most unathletic kids have been some of the best runners, in my opinion. Like, some of them have really stepped up, gone through the motion, got through the state, gone into college. And this is speaking both non-Native communities and Native communities, that some of the unathletic kids are some of the best runners. So you never know, but with the running, it's just a repetitive motion where you have to build such a good culture with it, and you have to build like good eating habits. It's a 24-hour 24/7 lifestyle where you can't just pick it up, go to practice for 2 hours and come back home.
Yeah. And I've noticed, you know, a lot of them were very sincere in what they said, and they were good people. You know, they'd say, oh, I'm going to focus on school, or I'm going to focus on school and running. And, you know, I get my last pleas with them was like, do not quit running at any cost. Some of them are smart enough to ask why. And I go, because your running was your healing, it was your structure. If you take out your healing and your structure, how do you think you're going to handle everything? And
Speaking of which, I actually didn't run my senior year in college. I went through, well, as you know, I still have another year if I wanted to through NAIA and possibly NCAA. But my structured life just went down the drain. Like, I got into some more trouble throughout my senior year, but I still just kept like going, because honestly, education has been easy for me. It was all the outside factors coming in at one time, especially in college, a senior year in college at that. So I wasn't ready for that type of culture change. And it really, that structure that kind of kept my life together since I was 6, just kind of disappeared my entire senior year. So it took it fell into a weird, like, depressive state where I was kind of in and out, but I needed to like
yeah.
continuously go. So I picked up different things, but senior year, definitely without that structure, was a struggle.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I at first thought you were going to say, we kept in touch, but we didn't share like in-depth feelings. But at first I thought you were going to say, yeah, I didn't run. I got my degree in your face for a little bit there. And I was like, oh, it's going to make me eat my words. But I'm now recalling, mention about getting your degree. And, I kind of know how driven you are. And I remember a couple times we're like, yeah, I need to get going if I'm going to get my degree. And I remember thinking, this kid's going to get his degree, whether he wants to think he will or won't. But it's good to know that, it does in fact have, some substance to your life. And I think that's the biggest thing. I try not to go too much into talks with people that do or do not care, but, I do think historical trauma gets passed on, and, you got to learn how to cope with certain things that get passed on. They had a really fascinating study that was talking about the siblings of Jewish concentration camp prisoners. And they were talking about what they suffered with and how they had to cope and all these things. And you said it correctly, where if you get something that's passed on that's a bad trait, you can obviously pass on good things, and you can retool, you can rewire it. It's harder. I mean,
That was like one of the things, like, I went through so many trainings about being trauma informed. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, just being me, or just being like a part of a Native community? Like, is that trauma informed? It's just another box to check with, the state coming in the education system. But now we're really starting to like re-identify ourselves.
more like self-reflective. You're able to kind of process what they're asking.
Yeah, but like that question, that what is self or intergenerational trauma, what is all this? And like, it was just like, well, yeah, we know this is there. How are we gonna fix it though? What is the process of what we're gonna fix this? Because obviously what's going on isn't working. So taking different new approaches, or not really new approaches, but just re-identifying who we are, is really helping.
Trying to find a healthy balance to make it work. And I'm biased, but I think that's why running has relevance. I think it helps people regroup. I say it, I don't say it a lot, but I grew up in a small town that had a lot of bad habits. I never got into drinking and smoking or anything like that. I was a little bit different, but neither did my 2 older sisters. And I remember someone from my town goes, how'd you guys never get into that scene? And I go, one, I had parents as good role models, and I go, 2 is I had an outlet. Running kept me out of stuff. And I go, I was the only runner in my school. We didn't have a running team. So I think having those outlets go a really long way, especially for the Native youth. I think that if I had one thing I could change with small Native communities, is having more outlets for these kids. It's really hard to know how to cope with life and move forward in life when you don't have a whole lot of things to pursue. I've said this to you before, and there's been a lot of kids where, I've probably overstepped my bounds, and it was a little bit too local and pressed, and it was a little bit too almost harsh. And I didn't have one kid ever get mad and say, you're wrong. He's mad and he ignored me. Every single kid was, you're right. I'll get better. I want to be better. What do we need to do? And I did not get the same receptive answers from folks that weren't, not everyone, but just not the same reflection in with other groups. But I did with the the Native communities and Native kids is they were willing to be better, and they wanted to be better. They just needed the outlet. They needed the platform. They wanted the opportunity. And over half the kids I recruit, just randomly they'll go, "Thank you for the opportunity." And I'm like, great. It just makes me appreciate being here. But it's like, you're gonna do well.
I think you got to give yourself more of a pat on the back too, with just like pursuing Indigenous running on the collegiate level, and that is a huge thing. Just like I haven't seen it done successfully yet.
There's been some good programs. I wish there was more recent. One of my mentors growing up was a guy named James Nels. I've told you about him.
Oh yeah,
you got to meet him. I'm so pumped.
I did.
Yeah, and he was a part of a really good Native team in college. They were, I can't remember the stats, but he was their
dominant.
Third or fourth.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. University of Central Oklahoma. So they've been there. I don't think they necessarily mean anything bad about it. I think there's a few things. I think coaches see stigmas and they get nervous. And again, I tell coaches, like, you know me well enough to know I've overstepped those bounds and have been a little bit too harsh with kids. I don't get that from my Native runners. And I go, I'll let you know when it happens. It will happen, I'm sure, but I don't get that. And a lot of times they're surprised. And I was like, they're good kids, they're coachable. And I go, they're relationship based, and they don't know what that means. And I go, essentially, if you're consistent, because as I told you, they have good BS detectors. If you're consistent and you're wholesome, they're going to trust the process and work with you. It's not rocket science. And then, the other thing, as I mentioned, is people just want their opportunity. They don't want special treatment. I don't ask for kids to ask for special treatment. They just want the opportunity. And again, being relationship based, wanting the opportunity, being very coachable. I have seen somewhat of a change with other coaches that have seen success. As you watched it, we had one of our runners beat the 3-time national D1 runner up head to head. And a coach goes, "Where'd you find him?" I was like, he wasn't even the top runner of the wings team when he ran on it. He was just, 4th or 5th guy. He could have been way better. And he goes, "So where'd you find him?" And I go, I don't know what to tell you, but there's hundreds of kids that are just as talented as him. They need the same outlet in the platform. And,
need at least an opportunity.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I think the last thing is, I think coaches get intimidated, not having that relatability. I think they almost see there's such contrast differences. And I think they get intimidated to not want to relate, or they can't relate. So they don't know how to talk to people as a person. I have some friends that are college coaches, and some aren't like this. I want to be careful not to call anyone out. And they have such a sales pitch when they go talk to these kids. And I go, just, I was telling you earlier, just have a conversation, just a regular conversation. Do not say, come be part of greatness and let's win a national title because we're awesome and the culture. And, that's all well. But at the end of the day, this sounds kind of funny. I've told kids, and what they wanted to hear was, if you mess up, I'm calling your mom, and your mom's going to rip you a new one, and then I'm going to rip you a new one, and you're not getting out of it. And I actually called a lot of if they messed up, they'd call their mom. But the most surprising thing was, I never had a kid get mad. I had one kid where he said not long after, him, and he goes, "I'm not mad you yelled at me. I'm just happy someone cared enough to yell." And I go, that sounded kind of sad. He's, it's not being sad, coach. It's being grateful. And he kind of encapsulated, my sentiments. So it's, a lot of great kids out there, a lot of great coachable kids. And, I'm like you, I hope there's more role models and, teachers and educators. I think we're on that. I think we're heading in the right direction. I think there's enough people that have, started to put the wheels in the motion. I'm trying to bug Wyneken to start being a coach and teach, and a couple other people. So,
Wyneken?
Yeah, you should give him a shout.
Oh yeah, that's my guy.
Well, cool. I won't take too much of your time, but we'll probably do a follow-up interview in the next month or two, and then just give me a shout whenever. You got any last quotes or thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, just stay safe, stay COVID free. Doing a lot of good things for Indian country. Give them a shout out.
Cool.
Metro Retro, yeah. Got some good apparel. Got to send me a jersey so I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
get
I
some
got
triathlon races in it.
jerseys and shirts come out. I think I'll have them at the end of this week. I got everything. I'm just waiting on the design on the back of the shirt. So I'll send you some stuff for free. I probably shouldn't say that on the interview, but I'll send you some stuff for free. So, but yeah, just give me a shout and then keep up the good work, brother. And yeah.
You have a good one, Coach. We'll see you.